Professor Kolex adjusted his hovering platform for the third time that morning, his four tentacle arms twitching with anticipation as he gazed out over the sprawling campus of the Centauri Prime Academy. The crystalline spires of the university's main buildings pierced the purple sky, their surfaces reflecting the light of three moons that hung perpetually overhead. As the Academy's most renowned and most demanding instructor of practical engineering, he had earned quite a reputation among the diverse student body. Another year, another batch of overconfident students, he muttered to himself, his voice modulator translating his native clicking sounds into standard Galactic Basic. The anti-gravity pad beneath his gelatinous form hummed softly as he made his way to the grand lecture hall. The massive amphitheater was already filling up with students from across the galaxy. A group of gaseous nebulons floated near the ceiling, their consciousness clouds swirling with nervous energy. Below them, the silicon-based Petroxians sat rigid in their seats, their crystalline forms refracting light across the room. The methane-breathing Jovians had taken their usual spots in the pressurized chambers at the back of the hall, while the plasma-based Solarians maintained their safe distance from the water-dwelling Aquarians. Professor Kolex couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. The Academy had come a long way since its founding, becoming the most prestigious engineering institution in the known universe. Yet something had been nagging at him lately, a growing sense that perhaps they had become too set in their ways, too convinced of their own superiority. As he settled into position at the front of the hall, his attention was drawn to the latest addition to his class roster. Tucked away in the standard atmospheric section sat a small group of bipedal creatures, their soft, pink-hued skin marking them as members of one of the galaxy's newest spacefaring species, humans. "Welcome to Advanced Structural Engineering," Kolex announced, his voice booming through the hall's acoustic enhancement field. "For those who haven't heard of me, which I find highly improbable, given my reputation, I am Professor Kolex, and I have failed more students than any other instructor in the Academy's history." A nervous ripple passed through the assembled students. The nebulon's clouds darkened noticeably, while several Petroxians developed visible stress fractures along their surface layers. But Kolex continued, his upper tentacles gesturing dramatically, "I have also produced more breakthrough engineers than any other professor. My challenges are legendary, my standards astronomical, and my methods unconventional." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. The human students leaned forward in their seats, their curious expressions catching his attention. Unlike the other species, who showed various signs of trepidation, these newcomers appeared almost excited by his declaration. "This year," he announced, his voice modulator dropping to a lower, more ominous tone, "I have prepared a special challenge, one that will push the boundaries of what you think is possible, one that will force you to question everything you know about engineering principles." The hall fell silent, even the usually chatty Solarians dimming their plasma fields in anticipation. Professor Kolex allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. After centuries of teaching, he had perfected the art of building suspense. Little did he know that his carefully crafted challenge was about to be turned on its head by one of those unassuming humans. But for now, he basked in the familiar atmosphere of anxiety and anticipation that filled the lecture hall, blissfully unaware that this particular class would forever change his understanding of engineering, adaptation, and the true meaning of innovation. Professor Kolex's hovering platform rose higher, commanding attention as holographic displays materialized around him. The images showed stark, barren landscapes from various hostile planets across the galaxy. "Your challenge," he announced, his tentacles gesturing at the rotating holograms, "is deceptively simple. You will each be transported to the Academy's environmental simulation dome. There, you must construct a survival shelter capable of withstanding extreme conditions. You have exactly 1 standard hour." A burst of nervous chatter erupted throughout the hall. One of the Petroxians raised a crystalline appendage. "Professor, what materials will we be provided?" "Ah, excellent question," Kolex's voice modulator crackled with enthusiasm. "Each of you will have access to standard emergency supplies, basic tools, smart fabric, universal sealant, and energy cores. Nothing more, nothing less." The Nebulon's consciousness clouds sparked with visible distress. But Professor, one of them pulsed, "Constructing anything solid with such limited materials would take at least 3 hours. even with optimal atmospheric conditions. Then perhaps you should reconsider your approach, Galactic responded, his gelatinous form rippling with amusement. The shelter must meet 3 critical requirements. First, it must maintain stable internal conditions for its occupants' specific biological needs. Second, it must withstand external pressures up to 50 standard atmospheres. Third, it must demonstrate structural integrity for a minimum of 24 hours. A Solarian student flared brightly. That's impossible. Even with advanced quantum architecture, creating a pressure-resistant structure in 1 hour is beyond theoretical limits. Impossible, Galactic's voice modulator pitched higher, almost singing the word. When the Aquarians first joined our academy, everyone said it was impossible to create underwater lecture halls. Yet here we are, with our pressurized chambers and phase shift barriers. Nothing is impossible, it's merely a matter of perspective. In the standard atmospheric section, the human students were huddled together, whispering intensely. Their behavior caught Galactic's attention. Unlike their peers who were frantically taking notes and running calculations on their quantum computers, these humans appeared to be sketching. How peculiar. The challenge begins tomorrow at first light, Galactic continued. Each student will be assigned a random environment type. You have until then to prepare your strategies. Remember, this test accounts for 60% of your final grade. The Jovians release stress methane bubbles that set off environmental alarms. The Petroxians had developed even more stress fractures, their crystalline forms now resembling cracked glass. The Nebulons had condensed into tight, anxious sphere. One more thing, Galactic added, his tentacles waving dramatically. You will be evaluated not just on success or failure, but on innovation. Show me something new, something unexpected. The universe rewards those who dare to think differently. As the students filed out of the lecture hall, Galactic observed their reactions. The Petroxians immediately formed study groups, their quantum computers already running millions of simulations. The Nebulons dispersed to the library, their clouds trailing behind them like worried thoughts. The Solarians clustered around the engineering labs, their plasma fields crackling with determination. But it was the humans who caught his attention again. They were laughing. Actually laughing. One of them had pulled out what appeared to be a primitive paper notebook, showing something to their peers who nodded enthusiastically. Most peculiar, Galactic muttered to himself, adjusting his hovering platform to a lower height. In all his years of teaching, he had never seen students react to his infamous challenge with such casualness. Perhaps he should make the parameters more stringent? No, he decided. The challenge was already considered impossible by most standards. Let the humans laugh now. Tomorrow they would learn why his class had the highest failure rate in the academy. As he glided toward his office, Galactic allowed himself a small ripple of satisfaction. After all, nothing taught a lesson quite like failure, and tomorrow promised to be very educational indeed. Little did the esteemed professor know that his carefully crafted challenge was about to encounter something he had never factored into his calculations: human ingenuity and the extraordinary power of simple solutions. Nathan Brooks sat cross-legged on his assigned sleeping pod in the Academy's Earth atmosphere dormitory, flipping through his grandfather's old camping handbook. Around him, his alien classmates rushed through the corridors, their quantum computers humming with complex calculations and simulations. "Hey, Earth dweller," a crystalline voice chimed. Nathan looked up to see Radox, a Petroxian student whose angular form sparkled under the artificial lighting. "Are you not concerned about tomorrow's challenge?" Nathan grinned, holding up the worn paper book. "Just doing my research, Radox. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." Old ways. Radox's crystalline structure vibrated with confusion. That appears to be a primitive data storage device. How can outdated information help with advanced structural engineering? "You'd be surprised," Nathan replied, turning to a page about quick shelter construction. "Back on Earth, I spent summers helping my grandfather build cabins in the mountains. No quantum computers, no smart fabric, just basic tools and whatever materials we could find." A passing group of Nebulon students paused, their consciousness clouds swirling with curiosity and disbelief. "But that is precisely why you should be worried," one of them pulsed. "Your species has only achieved interstellar travel within the last decade. Your construction methods are rudimentary at best." Nathan closed his book and stood up, stretching his arms overhead. At 6 feet tall, he towered over most of his crystalline classmates, but had to look up at the floating nebulons. You know what humans did before we had fancy technology? We survived. We built shelters in every environment on Earth: deserts, tundra, rainforests, mountains. We're pretty good at making do with what we've got. Making do. Radox's surface rippled with confusion. I do not understand this phrase. It means working with what you have, Nathan explained, tucking the handbook into his back pocket. Being adaptable. Finding simple solutions to complex problems. A Solarian student drifted closer, their plasma field dimming to a conversational brightness. But simple solutions cannot possibly work for complex engineering challenges. Professor Collex's tests are legendary for requiring advanced theoretical applications. Nathan shrugged, a gesture that always seemed to fascinate his alien classmates. Maybe that's exactly why they're so hard to pass. Sometimes we get so caught up in making things complicated that we miss the obvious answers. He thought back to his first week at the academy, when he'd been asked to design a water filtration system. While his classmates had created elaborate molecular restructuring devices, Nathan had demonstrated a basic charcoal and sand filter. Professor Collex had been speechless. It hadn't just worked. It had worked better than the advanced solutions. But your species hasn't even mastered gravity manipulation. A methane-breathing Jovian bubbled from their pressurized suit. How can you possibly expect to create a shelter that withstands 50 atmospheres of pressure? Nathan pulled up his own digital display, showing not complex equations, but simple sketches of geometric shapes. You know what's really good at handling pressure? Arches, triangles, domes. Nature figured this stuff out long before any of us started building things. His fellow students exchanged skeptical glances, or their species equivalent of skeptical glances. The nebulons sparked with dismissive energy, the Petroxians developed subtle stress patterns, and the Solarians' plasma field flickered with what Nathan had learned to recognize as condescension. Well, Nathan said, gathering his tools for tomorrow's challenge, I guess we'll find out who's right in about 12 hours. Anyone want to grab some dinner from the multi-species cafeteria? I heard they finally figured out how to make something close to pizza. As his classmates dispersed, still muttering about his primitive approach, Nathan patted the handbook in his pocket. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. The best solutions are usually the simplest ones, kid. Nature's been doing this a lot longer than we have. Tomorrow would prove interesting, he thought with a smile. Very interesting indeed. The environmental simulation dome stretched across 2 square kilometers of the academy grounds, its surface shifting with programmed weather patterns and atmospheric conditions. Professor Collex hovered at the entrance, watching as students filed into their assigned sectors. Remember, his voice boomed through the announcement system, you have exactly 1 standard hour. Your environmental conditions will activate in 3, 2, 1. The dome's interior transformed into a patchwork of different terrains. In one sector, hurricane-force winds howled across a barren landscape. In another, acid rain poured from artificial clouds. Extreme heat, crushing cold, and varying gravitational forces created a chaos of conditions. The Petroxians immediately began their work, their crystalline forms generating complex geometric patterns as they attempted to grow structured lattices from their own mineral reserves. Their precise mathematical approach would have been impressive if not for the precious time it consumed. Nearby, the nebulons had formed a collaborative cloud, their combined consciousness calculating quantum probability fields to manifest solid matter from energy states. Blue lightning crackled between them as they tried to stabilize their theoretical constructs into physical form. The Solarians took a different approach, attempting to create plasma-contained force fields that could serve as shelter walls. Their efforts lit up their sector like a miniature sun, the energy readings nearly overloading the dome's sensors. The Jovians, working in their pressurized suits, focused on molecular manipulation, trying to rearrange atmospheric particles into solid structures. Their method showed promise until a sudden pressure change caused their partially formed shelter to collapse. The Aquarians had developed what appeared to be a living architecture approach, attempting to grow organic structures from specialized bacterial colonies. However, the rapidly changing environmental conditions kept killing their bacterial strains before they could properly develop. 45 minutes remaining, Calyx announced, his tentacles twitching with satisfaction as he watched the increasingly desperate attempts around him. Then he noticed something odd in the Earth atmosphere sector. Nathan Brooks had spent the first 10 minutes doing nothing but walking around his assigned space, occasionally kneeling to touch the ground or toss a handful of dirt into the air. What is the human doing? A passing nebulon sparked nervously. He has not even opened his supply kit. Finally, Nathan nodded to himself and began to work. But instead of using the provided smart fabric or energy cores, he started digging. With quick, practiced movements, he created a shallow trench in a precise pattern. 30 minutes remaining. While other students frantically adjusted their complex technological solutions, Nathan had moved on to gathering the loose rocks scattered throughout his sector. He arranged them methodically along his trench lines, occasionally testing their fit like pieces of a puzzle. Using the universal sealant from his supply kit, he bonded the rocks together in what was clearly becoming a circular pattern. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he began weaving nearby vegetation into tight bundles. 15 minutes remaining. The Petroxian's crystal lattice shattered under pressure testing. The Nebulon's quantum construct destabilized, dissipating into useless energy. The Solarian's force field flickered and failed. One by one, the advanced technological approaches collapsed. Nathan, meanwhile, had created what looked like a primitive dome structure. He used the smart fabric not as a building material, but as a waterproof lining, securing it with more sealant. The woven vegetation formed a sophisticated cross-brace pattern between the rock layers. 5 minutes remaining. He disappeared inside his structure with the energy core. Those watching could see him making final adjustments through gaps in the construction that, oddly enough, seemed intentionally placed. Time is up. All construction must cease immediately. Professor Collex's hovering platform zoomed from sector to sector, his sensory appendages recording the results. Out of 50 students, only 3 structures remained standing. 2 showed critical stress readings. But Nathan's shelter had perfect stability readings. The internal temperature remained constant despite the shifting external conditions. The pressure differential was handling far more than the required 50 atmospheres. And strangest of all, it looked almost exactly like the ruins of ancient structures found on Earth, structures that had survived for thousands of years. The human emerged from his shelter, covered in dirt, but wearing a confident smile. Around him, the other students stared in disbelief at what he had accomplished with little more than rocks, plants, and a basic understanding of architectural principles that predated space travel itself. Professor Collex circled Nathan's shelter for the 3rd time, his sensory appendages twitching with increasing agitation. The structure before him defied everything he had taught for the past 2 centuries. It was primitive, basic, almost crude in its simplicity, and yet the readings were undeniable. "Explain," he demanded, his voice modulator barely containing his bewilderment. "How did you complete this in 10 minutes when the brightest minds in the galaxy failed within an hour?" Nathan ran a hand through his dirt-streaked hair. "Well, Professor, I just looked at what was available and remembered something we humans learned a long time ago. The arch is one of the strongest shapes in nature." The gathered crowd of students pressed closer as Nathan pointed to his shelter's foundation. "See this circular base? It distributes weight evenly across the entire structure. The dome shape means that any external pressure actually makes it stronger, not weaker." A Solarian student floated forward, their plasma field crackling with curiosity. "But the readings show complex temperature regulation. How without advanced thermal controls?" "Airflow," Nathan replied, pointing to the seemingly random gaps in the construction. "Hot air rises, cool air sinks. These vents create natural convection currents. The smart fabric lining helps maintain the temperature, but the structure itself does most of the work." Professor Collex's hovering platform dipped lower as his analytical instruments scanned deeper. The pressure resistance it exceeds required parameters by 300%. This is beyond theoretical limits for such basic materials. "That's thanks to these," Nathan said, indicating the woven vegetation cross braces. "They work like rebar in concrete, adding tensile strength to the compression resistance of the rocks. The universal sealant just keeps everything in place." The Petroxians crowded around, their crystalline forms reflecting the shelter's simple elegance. But our quantum calculations indicated that such primitive methods could not possibly. "That's just it," Nathan interrupted gently. "You are all trying to calculate the perfect solution. Sometimes perfect is the enemy of good enough." Humans learned that lesson through thousands of years of trial and error. Professor Kollax's gelatinous form rippled with excitement as his scanners revealed more details. The rock placement wasn't random. Each stone had been carefully selected and positioned to create a natural load-bearing structure. The vegetation wasn't just woven, but layered in a precise pattern that maximized its strengthening properties. The energy core, the professor probed. "Where did you install it?" Nathan ducked back into the shelter and pointed to a small nook near the floor. "Right here, where it can power a small convection fan. But honestly, it's just backup. The shelter works fine without it." A Nebulon student pulsed with disbelief. "You designed this to function without power." "Best backup system is no backup system," Nathan quoted, grinning. "Something else my grandfather taught me." Professor Kollax's sensory appendages were now whirring at maximum capacity. The more he analyzed the structure, the more elegant solutions he discovered. The angle of the dome perfectly balanced material efficiency with structural integrity. The spacing of the ventilation gaps created optimal airflow while maintaining structural strength. Even the dirt floor had been subtly graded to manage condensation. This is the professor's voice modulator struggled to find the right words. "This is brilliant in its simplicity." The admission sent a shock wave through the assembled students. Never, in recorded history, had Professor Kollax called anything brilliant. "But how did you know it would work?" a Jovian student bubbled. "Without running simulations? Without probability analysis?" Nathan shrugged. "Because humans have been building structures like this for thousands of years. We still find ancient ruins built on these principles. Some of them have survived earthquakes, floods, even volcanic eruptions." Professor Kollax's platform rose higher as he addressed the gathered crowd. "Students, observe carefully. What we witness here is not merely a successful shelter, but a profound lesson in engineering principles. Sometimes the most advanced solution is not the most effective one." He turned to Nathan, his sensory appendages still buzzing with excitement. "Mr. Brooks, you have not only passed this challenge, you have redefined it. Your solution demonstrates that true innovation can mean finding new applications for proven principles rather than always seeking to create new ones." The other students began examining the shelter more closely now, their initial skepticism transformed into genuine curiosity. Even the Petroxians, with their love of complex crystalline structures, were studying the simple rock arrangements with new appreciation. In the Academy's main lecture hall, Professor Kollax addressed the assembled students, his hovering platform positioned lower than usual, a sign of humility that shocked many longtime faculty members. "Today," he began, his voice modulator set to a contemplative tone, "we must acknowledge something remarkable. Our presumptions about advanced engineering have been challenged in the most unexpected way." The holographic displays around him showed detailed scans of Nathan's shelter, rotating slowly for all to see. "For centuries, we have pushed towards increasingly complex solutions, more advanced materials, more sophisticated calculations, more theoretical applications. Yet today, a student from Earth showed us that we may have overlooked something fundamental." Nathan sat among his fellow students, still dusty from his work in the environmental dome. Around him, the various alien species watched with newfound respect. "Humans," Professor Kollax continued, "are not like us. They did not develop technology in the ordered, logical progression we consider normal. They did not wait for quantum physics to build lasting structures. They did not need gravity manipulation to create soaring architecture." A Nebulon student's consciousness cloud pulsed with revelation. They adapted to their limitations instead of waiting to overcome them. Precisely, Kollax's tentacles waved enthusiastically. "While we sought to control our environments through technology, humans learned to work within them. They turned their very constraints into advantages." The professor brought up new images, ancient Earth structures that had survived millennia. "Look at these buildings, the pyramids, the Roman aqueducts, the Great Wall, built with nothing but basic materials and profound understanding of natural principles." "But surely," a Solarian student flickered, "their methods are outdated now that they have access to advanced technology." Nathan raised his hand. Actually, we still use many of these principles in modern construction, sometimes combining them with new technology, sometimes not. The point isn't to avoid advancement, it's about using the right tool for the job. Professor Galax's gelatinous form rippled with approval. This is perhaps the most valuable lesson we can learn from humans. They understand something that we, in our pursuit of advancement, sometimes forget: complexity is not always progress. The Petroxian students, their crystalline forms still showing stress patterns from their failed attempts, chimed in harmoniously. We spent so much time calculating perfect solutions that we missed simpler ones. And therein lies the true brilliance, Galax declared. Mr. Brooks did not just build a shelter today. He demonstrated a fundamental truth about engineering and perhaps about progress itself. The most elegant solution often lies not in adding complexity, but in understanding simplicity. The professor turned to face Nathan directly. Your species' greatest strength, I now realize, is not your technology or your calculations. It is your adaptability, your ability to work with what you have, to find solutions in constraints, to see opportunities where others see limitations. The assembled students began sharing their own realizations. The Jovians spoke of how humans had conquered their world's varied environments without environmental suits. The Aquarians noted how Earth vessels had explored ocean depths without advanced pressure fields. The Solarians remarked on human survival in extreme temperatures without plasma regulation. Moving forward, Professor Galax announced, this academy will incorporate new perspectives into its curriculum. We will study not just the latest technological advances, but also the fundamental principles that have stood the test of time. Sometimes, as we have learned today, the old ways are not primitive. They are proven. Nathan looked around at his fellow students, seeing genuine interest replace their former skepticism. The Nebulons were already discussing how to combine their quantum manifestation techniques with basic physical principles. The Petroxians were analyzing how natural crystal formations could inform their structural designs. Remember this day, Professor Galax concluded, his voice modulator resonating with conviction. It marks not just a successful engineering challenge, but a moment of true learning. Sometimes the greatest innovations come not from advancing beyond basic principles, but from understanding them more deeply. 6 months after the Shelter Challenge, the Centauri Prime Academy had undergone remarkable changes. The once pristine halls now featured displays of both advanced technology and fundamental engineering principles from various cultures. Professor Galax's hovering platform could often be seen paused before the new Earth Sciences exhibit, his sensory appendages taking in the elegance of simple machines. Welcome to the Academy's first Integrated Engineering Symposium, Galax announced to a packed auditorium of students and faculty from across the galaxy. Today we celebrate a new approach to engineering education. The main holographic display showed a split screen on one side, the quantum architecture of a Nebulon space station on the other, the basic structural principles of a Roman arch. Nathan sat in the front row, now joined by dozens of other human exchange students who had flocked to the academy after news of his success spread. Our curriculum now combines advanced theoretical studies with practical application courses, Galax continued. Students must demonstrate mastery of both complex technology and fundamental principles. As we have learned, true innovation lies in knowing when to apply each approach. The changes had already shown remarkable results. A team of Petroxian and human students had recently developed a revolutionary new type of space habitat, combining crystalline growth patterns with basic geometric principles. The Jovians had adapted ancient Earth mining techniques to improve their gas giant extraction processes. The universe has a wonderful sense of humor, Professor Galax mused, his tentacles gesturing at the diverse crowd. We thought we were accepting human students to help them advance. Instead, they helped us remember something we had forgotten in our rush toward advancement. Nathan had become something of a celebrity at the academy, though he remained remarkably humble about it. He now led workshops where students from all species learned to approach problems from multiple angles, combining their unique abilities with time-tested solutions. Professor, a Solarian student, raised their plasma field. Is it true that the Galactic Engineering Council is adopting these new principles? Indeed, Galax replied, his voice modulator brightening. Starting next year, all accredited institutions must include courses in fundamental engineering principles alongside advanced theoretical studies. They are calling it the Brooks Doctrine. Nathan blushed at this, but sat up straighter when Professor Collex turned toward him. Mr. Brooks, would you care to share your thoughts on these developments? Standing up, Nathan surveyed the eager faces and equivalent sensory organs of his fellow students. The best thing about basic principles is that they work everywhere. Gravity might change, atmospheres might be different, but the forces that shape our universe remain constant. When we understand these fundamentals, we can adapt them to any situation. The symposium erupted in agreement, each species expressing approval in their unique way. The Nebulons sparked with excitement, the Petroxians chimed harmoniously, and the Solarians pulsed with bright approval. But perhaps the most valuable lesson, Nathan continued, is that progress does not always mean leaving the past behind. Sometimes it means building upon it, combining the wisdom of experience with the power of innovation. Professor Kollex's gelatinous form rippled with pride. In just 6 months, the Academy had produced more breakthrough innovations than in the previous 5 years combined. By embracing both complexity and simplicity, they had opened new paths to discovery. The future of engineering. Kellex concluded, lies not in choosing between advanced technology and basic principles, but in understanding how to use both. And for teaching us this valuable lesson, we owe our gratitude to the newest members of our galactic community, the remarkably adaptable humans. As the symposium concluded, students and faculty mingled, sharing ideas across species and technological backgrounds. In one corner, a Nebulon was explaining quantum theory to a human student, while nearby, that same human demonstrated the principles of a lever and fulcrum to a fascinated group of Aquarians. Professor Collex watched it all from his hovering platform, his sensory appendages taking in the scene with satisfaction. Sometimes, he reflected, the greatest discoveries come not from looking forward, but from looking back, and sometimes the best teachers are those who still have the most to learn.